Hello, welcome to this video. In this video, I am going to talk about the application load balancer. In Amazon, there are different types of elastic load balancers: classical load balancer, application load balancer, and the network load balancer. I am not talking about the classical load balancer, but I am planning to prepare multiple videos on application load balancer and network load balancer. So, when those videos are available, you can find the links in the description. But in this video, I am going to talk about the application load balancer, and this will be the first video on the application load balancer. So, in this video, I will talk about the basic functionality of the load balancer, how it is balancing the connection with any application hosted on EC2 instance. Let me take the diagram and explain it in a better way. Okay. If you see this diagram, there are two EC2 instances, EC2 and EC2. So, these two EC2 instances are hosting an application. I call this application as application red because I am using the color coding for you to have a better understanding. So, these two EC2 instances, they are hosting an application which is called a red app, okay, and these two are grouped together to make a target group. So, when we are talking about this in demo, I will explain a target group. Okay. So, this is the application load balancer, and this load balancer takes connections from the users. So, whenever the users are trying to connect to the application hosted on these two EC2 instances, the connections are coming to the load balancer, and this is our application load balancer. So, this application load balancer forwards that request to the EC2 instances because our application is hosted on EC2 instances. Okay. So, this is a simplistic representation of how a load balancer can load balance the connections across multiple EC2 instances. Here I represented just two EC2 instances, but you can have multiple EC2 instances hosting the same application. And these two EC2 instances, they can be in a single availability zone or they can be in multiple availability zone. But in any case, this application load balancer, it balances the client connections to all the EC2 instances having application EC2, having application red app. Okay. Now, one important point, when the client connections are coming to the application load balancer, we have a protocol here which is HTTP. Okay. And also, when the load balancer is forwarding the connections to EC2 instances, the protocol is HTTP. Make a note of this protocol HTTP because I have some other videos where I will be talking about the HTTPS. Okay. So, here the connections are using the protocol HTTP. The load balancer balances the load from the client, and it uses the HTTP protocol again to forward those and balance those requests across EC2 instance. Okay. Another important thing, health check. So, the reason that I mentioned here the health check, because the EC2 instances deployed here, they will present a health check status. Okay. If these two EC2 instances are up and running and if they are serving the application, if the health is in a good status, then only they take the client connections. Okay. If any of these EC2 instances, if the health status is faulty or it is not healthy, they will not take the client connections from the load balancer. Okay. So, we discussed different things here. One is the target group, to group all the EC2 instances which are hosting the same application, and the HTTP protocol used by the client connections to the load balancer and also from load balancer to the EC2 instances, and also the health check. Okay. So, these are the important points, but when we talk about the other when we go to the other videos, I will talk about the other protocols and different other functions of the load balancer. Okay, so this diagram a simple representation of how application load balancer balances client connections to the EC2 instances. Okay, now let me go to the console and show you what I mean by that. I am into AWS console. Now I am going to the EC2 instances. I have 2 instances already up and running, and these 2 EC2 instances are hosting an web app, and this web app is red. Okay, so I named it as 1A and 1B because the first instance is, if you see here, the first instance is deployed in availability zone US East 1A, and the second one is deployed in US East 1B. Because the reason that I choose 2 EC2 instances in 2 different availability zones is I want to show you how the load balancer can balance the load across EC2 instances in different availability zones. Okay, now let me access each of these web server and show you if web server is working fine or not. This is private IP. Let me access public IP. Okay, so I am able to access. Now let me choose 1B, and here the public IP is this one. Okay, so in both cases I have my app up and running, and I am able to access individually. Now my intention is to show you an application load balancer which takes client connections and forwards those connections to the app. So the end user should be able to access this application. Now if I come down, there is an option to create a load balancer here. So if you choose a load balancer here, okay, so right now I do not have any load balancer. Now I am starting creating a load balancer. Now as I mentioned earlier, there are 3 different types of load balancer. Now in this video we are going to talk about the application load balancer. If you see the protocols here, the application load balancer can be used to take the client connections either on HTTP or HTTPS or on both protocols. Okay, now I am choosing the application load balancer and I choose to create. Okay, now here I can give a name to my load balancer. I will say application load balancer demo. Okay, ALB demo, and then there is an option here to choose internet facing or internal. So this load balancer is my external load balancer. So it is already it is the internet facing, because the end users, clients from the internet, should be able to access this load balancer to forward request to the app. Okay, but if your intention is to create an application load balancer in your internal network, you can choose internal here. The next option is IPv4 and dual stack. So we are dealing with IPv4 IPs, so I choose IPv4 here. But if you are dealing with IoT devices, then you will be dealing with the IPv6 IPs, so you have to choose dual stack. Now here I am choosing IPv4. Now if you come down a little bit, there is a listener path. Okay, so in this section you can select what kind of listener you want to configure for this load balancer. So if you choose here, there are 2 types of load balancers. One is HTTP and HTTPS. Now in this demo I am focusing on HTTP, but in my other videos I will be talking about HTTPS. So when you take the HTTPS protocol, you need to have some kind of certificates and all. So we'll talk about in a different video, but here I am choosing HTTP on port 80. Okay, now this load balancer here is the place where I can choose what are the availability zones for which the client connections can be load balanced. Because my EC2 instances are deployed in 1A and 1B in east zone, now I am going to select 1A and 1B. Okay, but if you are going to create more EC2 instances in different availability zones, here you have to select those availability zones, so that the load balancer will balance the client connections across all these availability zones. Because now in this demo I created EC2 instances in 1A and 1B, so I choose both 1A and 1B here. Don't worry about this add-on service, we will not talk about that. Okay, now everything is selected, we are good to go. Now at the second step it will say that somehow the load balancer is not secure. So what does it mean? Because if you go back here, we are using the HTTP protocol, so it is complaining that the protocol that you are using is not secure, so guiding us to use the HTTPS. If I select HTTPS here and if I go back, so it will not prompt that error message. Okay, so that is it, but we will talk about HTTPS more in a different video. So I am choosing HTTP and I choose next. Okay, now here as I mentioned, so this is a security warning, so we can ignore that and I can go to next. Okay, so here I am going to choose a security group, and this security group, as I know, that allows a port at the network layer, and this security group is allowing ports 80, 22 and 143. Okay, now I am choosing next. Okay, so this is the place where it will ask you to create a target group. So you have to create a target group which is a logical container which holds all the EC2 instances as a group. Okay, so as I do not have any target group here, I am going to create a new target group here. So I will name it as ALB demo target group. Okay, now target type, because all the EC2 instances will be part of this target group, so I am going to choose the option instance. But if you know the IP addresses and if you want to make the IP addresses as part of this target group, you can choose IP. So similarly the different other option as well, the lambda function. But for this demo, as because it is very simple and simple way of showing how load balance will happening, so I am choosing instance here. So protocol HTTP, I am choosing again HTTP here. So on port 80. So here you also got the option to choose HTTPS, but I am going with HTTP here. Okay. Now the other part which is very important part that I also mentioned while I was showing the diagram is health check. So health check is very important. If the health check is okay, then only the EC2 instance takes the client connections. Okay, now I am going to do the health checks based on HTTP protocol, and the path will be / because my web server is serving my application in the root and it does not have any subdirectories. So I can mention as /, but if your web server is serving the application from any subdirectory, you have to mention that subdirectory here. Okay, so if I expand here, there are few more options which talks about the health checks. Okay, so what is the health check threshold, which is 5? So unhealthy threshold. So there is some, these values are the thresholds for which it actually calculates whether the EC2 instance is healthy or unhealthy. Okay, and timeout is 5 seconds, and interval is 30 seconds, and what is the periodicity of sensing the health status of that particular instance. Okay, so for every 30 seconds it touches the EC2 instance to make sure whether it is healthy or not. If it passes the health check 5 times, it treats it as healthy. If it fails 2 times to say that it is healthy, then the instance status is marked as unhealthy. So all these values, they have got some value, but you can just choose the default value. Okay. So, success codes, you can specify 200 as your success code for your application, but you can define different other codes as well as a success code to return. Okay. So, this will not be helpful for now as a simple demo, but when we go to the advanced part, talking about different other functionalities of the load balancer, we will try to cover the success codes there. Okay, for now, when we're creating a target group, we put all the inputs here. Okay, but as I mentioned, health checks is very important on the target group. Register targets. Okay, now this is the place where I am going to group what are the instances that should be part of this target group. Okay, so as I mentioned here earlier, I am going to choose all these EC2 instances and I am going to add these EC2 instances to my target group. Okay, both the EC2 instances. Next. Okay, so this is the review part, review all the details that we supplied and then create. Okay, so if we click here, it will take you to the home page of the application load balancer. Okay, so there are various values that I would like to talk about here. Okay, so in the description tab on the load balancer, you see here it is a name that we have given and the DNS name. Okay, so the DNS name specified here, it is the actual name that we try to access with on the browser. The load balancer is accessed with this DNS name. Okay, but this load balancer does not have a IP assigned, so we always access the load balancer using a DNS name. Okay, so state is right now it is a provisioning. We will wait for it to turn active, and the scheme is internet facing IPv4, and this load balancer is serving in 1A and 1B. Fine, and security group is also fine because it is open for 80 and 22 ports. Okay, so there are different other attributes which we are not talking now, but let me go to the second tab, listener. Okay, so listener is the place where it is configured to take the client connections. So all these are the details that we provided during the listener configuration. Okay, but we will talk more about listener later. Monitoring, so all the status monitoring. Okay, so when it comes to the listener, I can actually press here, you can add different rules here, but right now I am not adding any rules, but just go with the default one. Now the other part is target groups. As part of the load balancer creation, we created a target group. Now let's go and see what is there in the target group. Okay, so this is the target group that we have created during the load balancer creation. So if I go to the home page of this one, so the health check settings, all these we discussed earlier. Stickiness, we will discuss this in a different video. And if you go to the second tab, targets, it will list all the targets that are defined or included in this target group, and the important thing that you need to note is healthy. So these two EC2 instances are reporting healthy status to this target group. So these two EC2 instances will take client connections. Okay, so all other values are default, so we don't talk much about it. So let's see if the load balancer is active. Okay, so now the load balancer, it is now in active status. Now at this point of time, I can use the DNS entry of the load balancer and try to access my EC2 instances and see if it is balancing my load. Okay, I am copying. Because I am accessing on HTTP protocol, I am typing HTTP and then the load balancer DNS entry. Okay, now I am able to access my EC2 instance. Let's note the IP that is mentioned here. Okay. Now as I refresh here, it should point to a different IP. That means the client request is now forwarded to a different EC2 instance. So as I keep refreshing this, each time it sends the request to different EC2 instances. Okay. That means the client connections coming from the end users, they are being load balanced by the application load balancer across the EC2 instances defined. Okay. So far you have seen how the load balancing is happening using application load balancer. Now I am going to simulate an error condition where one of the EC2 instance reports an unhealthy status, and when the EC2 instance reports unhealthy status, the application load balancer should not forward the client request to the EC2 instance. Okay. So let's do that. Now go to the EC2 instances, and I am going to shut down the HTTPD service, but before that let me show you the health status, target group, and select targets. So if you see here, both the instances are reporting healthy status here. Now I am going to one of the instance, let's take 1A. Okay. And for this instance I am going to shut down the service. Let me access the public IP. Okay, I am into EC2 instance. Now let me go to root user. Now I am going to shut down systemctl stop. Service. Now it is not up and running. Now at some point, because there is a 30 seconds health period, the periodicity, so at some point we have to wait till the instance 1A reports unhealthy status here. Okay. Now if you see here, the instance 1A is now reporting unhealthy here. Now let me access the load balancer. Now what I am expecting is, this time when I am accessing the load balancer, it should forward request only to one instance, not to both instances. Now if you see here, so any number of refreshes, whatever client requests that are coming now, the application load balancer, it forwards all those requests to the instance 1B and not to instance 1A, because the instance 1A is marked as unhealthy. Okay. So the health status plays a very important role in case if any of the EC2 instance is reporting unhealthy status, the client request will not be forwarded to the EC2 instance. So you have to remember this point. It is a very important point when you are working with the load balancers. Hope this video gives you some understanding of what is an application load balancer and how the application load balancer balances the client connections among the EC2 instances. I took some time to explain different details about the application load balancer, but in my other videos I will be directly going into the functionality demonstration. Okay. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, please comment them and I will respond as soon as I can. And if this is the first time you are here, please subscribe my channel to get any future updates from my further videos. And thank you very much for being here to watch this demo. Thank you.